during shelter in place. Every day seemed like Friday. Welcome back, everybody. Last night was quite a treat with 3 women of color church planters, and boy, we need to have another workshop on how best to facilitate panels and meetings with Kay Smith. So my juice is already flowing because I suffer from all long and boring meetings all the time. So thank you, Kay, for that phenomenal leadership and facilitation. So I just want to thank everybody. Many participants last night themselves could have contributed so much. So this is an appetizer, and we are looking forward to having an entree workshop down the road if people are willing and want to hear more. So we have no fear. Whatever there's a need, we plow along. So let's just say a quick prayer, and then I'll let Reverend Dr. Neal Presa start the panel for today. How do you overcome gendered resources? And the panelists, you are in for a treat today. So God, we thank you. Thank you for the team you have brought together. And there's nothing we cannot conquer with wonderful people who doesn't have huge ego, but servant hearts. So we thank you for gathering us. And thank you for letting us experiment with a virtual webinar. So just we want to praise you. We are filled with gratitude and joy during the storm and your calming presence. Pray this in your name. Amen. So Neal Presa is a pastor at Village Presbyterian Church in San Diego. He is an associate pastor there. And this man has multi-gifts. I could go on, but I'm type A when it comes to time. So you're on.
Very good. Thank you, Young. And I want to add my welcome to everyone to this Gender Summit 3. This indeed will be a treat and hopefully a help to all of you. This panel is to be focused on resources, how to identify resources, how to procure those resources, for indeed where God gives vision, God gives provision. And there are resources that abound, and we may not be aware of those resources or how to tap them. And so this is going to be a practical learning experience as we look to 3 of our experts who are proven in this field of advocating and of identifying resources. Please join me in welcoming first the Reverend Joanne Rodriguez, who is the Executive Director of the Hispanic Theological Initiative Consortium at Princeton Theological Seminary for the last 18 years. The consortium holds a membership of 24 PhD granting institutions whose purpose is the academic and professional development of Hispanic intellectual leaders as faculty in the academy and as role models to inspire a present future generation of Hispanic students and scholars. During her tenure, Joanne has helped HTI to establish a consortium in 2008, and she has fundraised well over $8.3 million and has helped to graduate well over 136 PhD students. Bravo, Joanne. Wow, just in reading that, I'm just so prideful and so grateful. She holds the MDiv and THM in homiletics from Princeton Theological Seminary, and since 2011, she is an assistant pastor at the Westminster Presbyterian Church in Trenton, New Jersey, a fantastic congregation that's committed to God's transformative justice and shalom in the community and around the world. And so please join me in welcoming Joanne Rodriguez. Our second panelist is Maggie Harmon, and Maggie comes to us as one of the ministry relations officers for the Southwest region with the Presbyterian Foundation. And in that role, she provides consultative services designed to create and nurture generous living and organizational sustainability and systems that support long-term ministry. Maggie brings a wealth of experience, more than 20 years of legal practice, management consulting, and leadership coaching. She is a certified Six Sigma black belt. Okay, that is not a martial arts black belt. That is, in short, that is, she knows organizations and how to manage projects well. She has extensive training in social science-based organizational development. She is a ruling elder at the Montclair Presbyterian Church in Oakland. She got her undergraduate degree. She's a fellow Aggie, UC Davis, go Aggies. And she holds her law degree from Santa Clara University School of Law. And so we welcome Maggie Harmon. Please join me in welcoming Maggie Harmon. Fantastic. And our final panelist, I welcome the Reverend John Moore. John Moore is a mission engagement advisor with the Presbyterian Mission Agency, where he focuses on the 1001 new worshiping communities. And so John will be our resident expert with respect to church planting and church planting resources. He divides his time between raising money with the 1001 movement and training and coaching new worshiping community leaders as they work to financially sustain their communities. John joined the Presbyterian Mission Agency staff in 2014. He previously served with Fuller Theological Seminary, China Source, Church Resource Ministries, and Faith in Action, and spent more than 15 years serving in marketing and management positions in business and politics. John holds the MDiv from Fuller Seminary, the BA from Linfield College. He is a member of Los Ranchos Presbytery, and he presently attends the Laguna Presbyterian Church. Please join me in welcoming John Moore. Fantastic. Well, to begin our panel, let me first turn to Joanne and then to Maggie and to John. So one by one, please share with the Gender Summit friends a story, one story of how you helped to raise money for your particular organization, your particular ministry.
Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see you all. Such an amazing group of women and men. Such a pleasure to be with you. So I want to start with a story when really it was a conversion experience for me as well. Prior to, so I've been with HTI 21 years out of the 25 years of in 2021, HTI will be 25 years old. So we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary. And we have a bunch of events that we've loved to invite you to. So, so I came as an assistant director, and at that time, HTI was very well funded. It wasn't, there was a study done, and the Pew Charitable Trust gave us over $3.3 million to begin the program. And at that point, it was Daisy Machado. She started the program at Emory with Justo Gonzalez. And then there was Saida Maldonado, who became the next director. And that's who I was working on as the assistant director. Once Saida left, I became the director, and we still had quite a bit of funding. It wasn't until 2003 that we got notice from Pew that they were changing their direction, and we were going to have to think of a new way of doing the work of HTI and start fundraising. And so this was new to us. I really didn't have a clue as to what I was doing at that time. But I do have a banking degree. I had a banking career before I came to HTI, and I knew finances, and I also knew data, and I knew how important it was to make sure that the customer was serviced and result driven. So from that experience, I decided to really focus in on what it was that HTI did really, really well, and that was mentoring. The fact that our students were grounded in community was something unique. They were intellectually capable of doing the work, but the element of being connected to the Latinx community, their scholarship that was very needed at the time and was not represented in theological education was very important. So based on what the need, this is more of a business model, not necessarily a church model. I kind of use my banking experience and focused on making sure that we collected strong data and we were result driven. So what do schools look for? They want faculty and they want students to graduate within a certain period of time. And studies show that in theological education, most students were not graduating, and that includes any culture. More than 50% of graduate students do not finish their PhDs. And if they do, it can take them 8 to 9 years to finish. So began to really work at making sure that our pipeline, whoever was in a PhD program, we mentored them and we supported them so that they would finish. And then we would show the results of the mission of the program. In the meantime, we had to begin to be creative, and the board played a major role in this. One of the things I learned is that I don't do this work alone. You have to have strong partners and you have to have people with different skill sets. And so the board, we had a conversation, well, how do we move HTI forward? And we started thinking about we don't grant PhDs, we support students in PhD programs. So we looked at our database and we saw that there were about 40 schools that have PhD programs, and we invited them to a conversation. And I'm saying this because fundraising is not just about money. It is about building relationships. When we invited them to this conversation, many of them at first were not responding. And so you have to be persistent. And one of the things that what I had to do was I had to get on the phone and actually try to get the president or the dean on the phone and tell them why it was important for them to come to this meeting. So out of the 40 presidents and deans we invited, we got 17 that came to the meeting. And out of the 17, 16 signed on for the consortium. And that was the way that we began to build partnerships and continue to show results. An event that happened in 2008 that was very crucial for me personally as a Latina woman to find my voice was I had some run-ins with some leaders, and I'm not going to name the institution and I'm not going to name those leaders. It was a very challenging time. But because I believed in the mission so much, I really fought for the mission of the program. So one of the things that I realized in that at that time was it was not about me. And I told people this. I said, I can get another job. I was extremely successful in my banking career, and I knew that I had other options. I know that sometimes we don't see that, but I think we need to understand that this is a vocation and it's not a job. And that if God wants you to do certain work, I really, really believe this, God will also help provide the resources and also the language and also your training and all of those things. So part of believing in the Holy Spirit and part of believing in God's providence, abundance, is that you need to also do all of those things. It's not just like it's going to come from the heavens. There's certain steps. In fighting back, I realized that we needed to take our energy and continue to focus on what we did and continue to show the quality of work that we did. And that year, we signed up for an award from Excelencia in Education. Now, Excelencia in Education highlights Latino programs that are successful, led by Latinos for Latinos. They're not in theological education, but why I'm saying this particular story is because you need to get allies also outside of theological education, because then they placed us on the larger landscape of education, period. We were a program that they recognized for doing excellent work at what we did. We got only $5,000 from them, but the promotion of the program was important. And the individuals that we gained as supporters for the HTI has still to this day remained to be very faithful to the mission. So I'll leave it there. and I'll share more because I know I only have 5 minutes to speak.
That's fantastic, Joanne. Thank you for sharing that story. Maggie, I'd like to invite you to share from your own experience.
Thank you, Neal. So I work for the Presbyterian Foundation, and I like to say I have the privilege of working for the foundation. And within that, I get to do a lot of work to help people fundraise, but I don't fundraise directly. So it's a little bit of a unique position to be in, where I really get to help people right size to what it is that they're doing and take advantage of having the consulting background to make sure that what we're doing is building programs that are authentic to who you are and what you're doing, take advantage of best practices, and then modify to make sure that the message is accurate and effective for who you are and what you're doing. So just a couple of examples that I thought of are actually 2 capital campaigns that I recently consulted on for churches in 2 different areas. One, a very small church in an urban area. I think that they have 35 active members. And, you know, by all rights, folks would tell them that they should just close, but they had a vision. All 35 people had a vision about what they wanted to do with their building to make it a base for ministry in the community. Yesterday, we heard a lot about being out in the community and walking with people and meeting them where they were. And this was really the vision that this group had. And so there's a model for capital campaigns for what you're supposed to do. And they look a certain way, and you just sort of, you know, you take that and you do that. And at the point that I engaged with them, they had this model and they were trying to figure out how to actually use this model with a church of 35 people, which it just wasn't going to work, right? To have lead donors and a silent period and then a year of planning and all this kind of thing. So what we did was we took the model, and it was a team of about 4 who were working on this. And I started to just ask some questions about what the community was like. And if there were 35 active members, how many other people came to the church to use the church building for different things? How many people could be engaged in this vision that they had for what the building could become for the future and for the whole community? And just through having some of these questions and sort of challenging a little bit of the standard model and not rejecting it and saying, well, we can't do this because we're not this thing and we're not big enough, so we're just going to reject it. Instead, we took it and we worked it to be effective for what they wanted to do. And the focus, and I took some notes as I was thinking about this before, they really focused on what the building, because they needed to change some things in the building, would do for ministry and how it would benefit the community. And they printed up some brochures themselves because they didn't have a budget to go out and do, you know, the fancy printing and all of this kind of stuff. One of the volunteers made one of the thermometers for how well they were doing. They agreed to ask community members to give because it would benefit the community, not just the church members. And they ended up raising twice as much money as they wanted to raise in half the amount of time, because they did it in a way that was like completely authentic to them, that was willing to adapt to what they needed, and that wasn't afraid to go out and to ask beyond, I think to some degree what Joanne was saying, go out and ask for resources beyond what you think the norm is to ask for. I think that that's one example. Another example of helping to fundraise and finding some of that creativity, I think, is another capital campaign, totally different circumstances, well-funded church, lot of people, wealthy area, but they're a snowbird population. And so, you know, rather than having 12 or 15 months to run this campaign, they felt like they had 2 months. And when they came to me and they said, we want to do this, and I, you know, at first I just wanted to hang up the phone and say, well, you can't do it in 2 months. But my job is to say, well, maybe, and what if, and to help them go through that. And so again, we started asking those kinds of questions. What if we did have to do this in 2 months. What could we do in 2 months? How would this look? How do we compress and change some of the pieces? And so I think that I'll close by just saying, with those two examples, both of them taught me how important it is to know what your ideal is, and then to be really willing to get creative with what might happen if you can't have the ideal. And when you think about fundraising, to think about what if and where might and how maybe, not can I do this model or can't I do this model? Because that's what creates the room for possibility to happen.
Maggie, thank you for that and those prompting questions for us to think about. I want to invite John. John, if you would share from your own experience.
Thanks, Neal. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Yesterday was very powerful, and I really appreciate being included on the panel. You heard from Neal in my introduction that I work for 1,001 New Worshiping Communities. And this is an initiative of Presbyterian mission to plant 1,001 churches across the US. Several years ago, I was contacted by a woman on our staff, her name was Sarah, about a man she knew who was a great advocate for planting churches and had supported her at a previous organization. Because of her prior relationship, I suggested that we develop an ask that would benefit the apprenticeships part of our initiative that Sarah was developing. So referencing Sarah, I called the man that she suggested and asked for an appointment for she and me to talk with him about an important aspect of 1,001. And he had a little knowledge of 1,001. He'd heard about it, not detailed, but we had a head start because of that. Now, he was a major donor with significant record of philanthropy. And so I saw that, and I invited Chip Hartwick, who was one of the top executives of the Presbyterian mission at the time, to join us. So this is how the appointment went. We met over lunch. Chip started out by welcoming our prospect and invited him to talk about his background, his business, his philanthropy, his prior involvement with the church and church planting. And then Sarah engaged him about his ongoing support of her previous organization and talked about her work for 1,001 and cited several stories about individual apprentices. And then we just continued a conversation over lunch. Well, after lunch, I acknowledged his longtime commitment to the church and church planting, and he affirmed this. I then asked him if he thought he would continue his interest in church planting. He said yes. I asked if, after what he heard about 1,001, he thought what we were doing was an effective way to start churches. He said yes again. I asked him if he would be interested in hearing how he could participate in 1,001. He said yes. I told him that it cost us $6,000 to place an aspiring church planter in an apprenticeship, and invited him to fund 5 apprenticeships over the next year. He then said yes to this $30,000 gift. I then collected specific details on how to receive his gift through his donor advised fund. I like this story because it highlights the importance of relationship in raising money. Also, the importance of matching the prospect with somebody of equal gravitas. In this case, it was an executive from the Presbyterian mission. It emphasized listening before talking, which is really key, and the importance of personal stories. And finally, it shows how one can listen your way into an ask. And then, of course, follow up. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
John, thank you. That is an incredible story, walking us through from the initial contact to the lunch appointment and what happened in that. Let's thank you all three. I want to for us to engage in each of the stories that you've shared. So rich, indeed, where God gives vision, God gives provision. So the word or the framework that came to mind of fundraising is preceded by friend raising, right?
Mm-hmm.
Friend raising, cultivating those relationships and building relationships and then cultivating it. Can you each, Joanne and Maggie and John, with the stories that you shared, Joanne, of reaching out to the theological educators, the theological leaders to broaden the networks, and Maggie helping the capital campaign teams to look at the mission possibilities, and John in this asking that major ask of the major donor. What are some top two fear factors that would cause someone to hesitate and say, oh, I don't think I could reach out, or I don't think I could make that phone call, or I don't think we could make this capital campaign happen? What are in your experiences, what was and what might be the fear factors and how to overcome that? Because it's, folks on this summit might say, well, that's all well and good, you guys did that, but in my context, in this time, and especially COVID, I don't know if I or we can do it. So how do we get from the need to fundraise, need to friend raise? What are those fear factors that you experience?
Oh, I'll start just by saying that, I think once I realized that fundraising was really friend raising, it was really relationship building, it really, reduced the trepidation I had about it. But, everybody's afraid of doing the ask. That's the big bugaboo in fundraising. And you have to overcome the fear of somebody saying no. You need to take a small risk, a risk that probably only has minor consequences. That is, somebody would say no. So we need to do a little self-reflection, a little self-therapy, you might say, and get yourself in a state of mind where you're saying, yes or no, I can live with this. And the second part about overcoming fear is to be organized. To be organized. You really know the identity of your project, of your community. Really know the mission in a couple words. Really know the problem that you're solving, the solution that you're bringing to it, and really know what it's going to cost and what that impact is, what the cost impact ratio is. If you have those things down, and you believe in this and you believe in what you're doing is important, those things will all help you overcome fear.
Fantastic.
So,
Joanne and Maggie,
I would add to that is that, like anything, you have to demystify the fundraising. There's a science, there's a way of doing fundraising that you have to educate yourself in, like John said, and so that does require time. You also I think that as Latinas or women of color, we play a lot of different roles. So you need to discern what part you're going to play in the organization. And then you need to build your skill set, at least some of the language and some of the financial pieces of making it, going to a funder or writing a grant. So a lot of the work that I've done is mostly grant writing. I haven't done a lot of the personal lunches in that sense. You need to build a relationship with a granting officer.
Mhm.
And so how do you do that? Well, you produce maybe some material. And like Maggie said, some of us, when we started out, we didn't have a lot of money. Once the money dried up, I had to find creative ways of still doing our brochures and it not be that expensive. And so I found designers that were willing to volunteer some of their efforts or less expensive, but still produce the quality of work that I needed to present to officers. And I would write letters to them, or I would make a phone call, or I would go to a conference where I knew they were attending. And I would have to build up the courage in me to go to them and say, here's what we do. And so it's funny because I went to an event and I had 10 brochures with me, and I made sure my goal was always not to come home with any brochures. So I would make sure that everybody got a brochure before I left that room. And the brochure would spark a conversation.
Yeah.
And one of the things I always do is I ask people, well, what do you do?
Right.
Because individuals like to talk about what they do. And then as I'm listening to them, I find a place of connection with the work that we do. So there's so I had to overcome that fear, and I had to give myself a goal when I walked into these different rooms that I was not familiar with, or maybe not even welcome, and just walk into that room and begin and spark the conversation and get. And I was surprised as I kept doing that, how people were like, wow, that's what you do. That's awesome. That's great. And it was just having a conversation.
Right.
So I'll leave it there.
So really reframing and reorienting the fear that we project, right, on asking, on fundraising and demystifying. I like that term, to demystify that it is about having a conversation, right? And if we put it in that way, it's like, oh yeah, I could do that. I could do that. Maggie, go ahead. Joanne.
No, and that people will be interested in the work that you do, and as you're sparking the conversation, it's really, really important to listen. To listen, to hear what are they interested in, what's the gesture, what are you reading in their body language, not just in what they're saying. I mean, it's relationship building, and then also not leaving it there. So 3 months down the line, or send a letter, send an email, continue to build the relationship.
Okay, very good. Good. Sage advice. Maggie, fear factors that you encountered in the 2 congregations that you worked with, like what were a couple of fear factors that you helped, where you came alongside them to maybe demystify the possibilities or impossibilities?
Yeah, I would say that this is broader than just those 2 congregations and those 2 projects, and it's something that I see in a lot of different areas. And I think that both John and Joanne said this in different ways, but they're exactly right. It's that fear of the no. That is the biggest thing. And whether it's the no, or reading that as a failure, or feeling like you didn't win, or however you frame that in your own mind, being able to get over no and being able to walk away from a no without taking it personally. I think the other piece, the other big thing to get over when you're doing this kind of work and doing these kinds of asks is to just get clear with yourself on how you feel about money. Because you're asking for money. That's what we're talking about tonight. And there's other ways to ask for help and support of your ministry, but I think that we're really talking about money. And I would say, ask yourself, how do I feel about money? When I say money, Does my shoulders get tight? Do I like have an immediate visceral reaction? What do I think about this thing that is a tool that we're going to use? Because if you don't like money, if you have negative feelings about it, if you have negative feelings about people who have money, that's going to come through. So make sure you're clear with yourself on how you feel about that as you go out and you start to talk to people about why you need this thing. I think that the other piece is, remember as you're doing it, that you're not just asking for money, you are asking for help. And you're asking for help with something that is really important to you. And it's probably really important to the world. I mean, especially as we're talking about church planting and ministry and the incredible ministries that we were hearing about yesterday. When you're talking about this, you're talking about having an enormous impact on lives, on spirit lives, and on, the practical everyday needs that people have in serving. And so when you're going and you're asking, you're not just asking for $1, you're asking for someone to engage with you in the transformation of lives. And so ask for that help. Don't be afraid to get into that core value and to say, this is what I need help with. I want to do this thing. And when someone says no, walk away and don't take that personally, because that no is about something about them. It's not necessarily about you or about your vision or how you want to serve. So I think that those are the big elements that you need to think about as you're going out and doing this work.
That's great. That's great advice. Joanne.
Yeah. So I want to actually give some examples of that. Okay. So back in about 8 years ago, I wrote an inquiry letter to a funder with 3 ideas that I thought were really important. Every single waited 2 months, did not get any response whatsoever. Called to find out. Then I got another call. And then finally I got the officer on the phone, and they said that they didn't do any one of those 3 things, and that they were not going to be able to fund those initiatives. So it was very disappointing, very disheartening, and we absolutely also needed funding. But we continued the conversation. And as we continued the conversation, we then garnered their support for fellowships. That's something that they wanted to do, and it was something that we needed. So we were able to get the funding for fellowships. That then led to a stronger relationship with that organization. And then 5 years later, every single one of the programs that initially was in that first inquiry letter got funded.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
So this is just so that you know that sometimes there's more information in the background that you don't know about, and you need to ask questions and not walk away from a no with your head down. Instead, say, okay, this isn't happening. How do I turn this no into questions and a possible yes for another match? Another example of that I'll give you with another funder. We went to a meeting, we proposed 3 things to them, and none of them, they really showed a real interest for it. But in the conversation, we discovered that there was another way to approach what they would be willing to fund. So went back to the drawing board, engaged my steering committee, decided to write the grant in a different way, take a different direction, and then we got the money for this, what we wanted to do, but in a different way. And that's what led to Open Plaza. If you go to HTI's website, htiprogram.org, that's what led to Open Plaza, a public presence. We had in theological religious education. So a no can be turned into a yes. And that's why I say that befriending these people, staying in touch with them, continuing to read what they put on their website or what they're interested in is a way to eventually get the money. Don't lose the relationship because they said no the first time.
Yes.
Yeah, no is just an objection. It's not the end of the conversation. I think that's excellent.
That's a key thing.
You know, rarely is a no a hell no. Usually,
yeah. That's right. This is not Shark Tank, right? It's not Shark Tank. This is not Shark Tank.
Yeah. It's
turn up Shark Tank, friends. Yeah.
Wrong project, wrong time, wrong person asking, wrong meeting with the wrong person. You know, you take that no and just run with it. It's just an objection, and you just move to the next thing.
That's incredible. Yeah. So relationship building, believing in the vision, keeping at it because you believe in the vision. All three of you spoke about being in relationship with others who are encouraging and believing in that vision, right? John, you spoke about that. You invited Chip Hardwick, the director there of Theology and Worship. You invited Sarah. Joanne, you spoke about your board and the steering committee, right? Maggie, I know that you work in relationship with other ministry relations officers, and you're a VP and New Covenant Trust investment advisors and all the rest. That it's not just you, isn't it? Can you speak about that? About surrounding yourself also with folks whom you bounce ideas off to go back to the drawing board with, and then to carry on in the process of seeking the financial support and fundraising.
So at HTI, we use a term en conjunto, and it means it's so much more than together. It translates in Spanish to together, but it's so much more. We are a multi-ethnic, multidisciplinary, multi-collaborative, ecumenical, multi-gendered organization. We create leaders to serve the world and to serve in their context. We're not trying to dictate to people where they should serve and how they should serve. We want to provide the professional development to get them to be the best leaders that they can be in the context that they wish to serve in. That has created a breadth of collaborators in this work. The consortium presidents and deans, I speak to them twice a year for 15 minutes beyond the meeting that we have. I've scheduled a 15-minute conversation, one-on-one, so I can hear their ideas, because when we have this big gathering in a meeting, it's only 3 hours long and we don't get to hear each president or dean. That intentionality about building relationships and listening then helps me discern who can help and what when we're looking for building the organization. So an example of this is sometimes someone will say this student needs support, and I'll invite a student to come to an event. We have had several students that have gone back to their schools and said, you need to become part of the HTI consortium. Just by having one interaction in one of our gatherings. So our students, the faculty, the mentors, the steering committee members, the presidents, the deans, we had one grant that everything was almost set to go. And one of the things was we needed to have 3 presidents to sign on because they didn't want it just to come. Most of our funding comes to Princeton since we're located here. So we got on the phone and immediately I was able to get 3 presidents to sign on to the grant so we can submit the grant on time and get that funding. So again, it's so vast and so broad in so many different ways, but the relationships are strong. And because the relationships are strong and these people believe in the mission and they believe in us, they believe that when they give us money, that's the other thing that's really important, that when an institution gives you money, you have to carry out what you say that you're going to do with that money. And if you cannot do that, if you don't have the infrastructure, if you don't have the talent, and if you don't have the way to build the project, you may have some stumbling blocks, but you need to be able to show results to these funders.
Yeah.
And so one thing to remember is you got to have those ducks lined up, right? And then, so maybe you don't want to go for a big grant at first. You want to start out small, and then you build on it, because then you have a track record.
Right.
And even in church settings, you need in theological and religious education, you need to build a track setting. And so you start out with what you possibly can do, and you build on that. And I think we had to step back first because we lost our funding, and really look at what we were doing and take out some of the programming. We used to have postdocs, we used to have master level students, we had regional gatherings. Those things were cut out of our program, and we focused on what we did best. And then now we're starting to build up again, you know, and strengthen the organization to move forward. So it's important. It's a lot of moving pieces, but I think relationship again is the way to, and how you identify which relations and how they support you at different times.
Very good. Yeah, and showing your being faithful with a little to be faithful with a lot, right? And to show transparency and all of that. You're an organization with integrity that people can trust in your giving because of the track record. Yeah.
Especially like color-led organizations. It is only 3% of foundation money is given to colored people. We don't have a big space there. So the requirements for us are different.
Okay. Right.
And you know, I don't have anything to hide. So I'm gonna say we need to be very honest and upfront about our realities, because when we don't speak the truth, then we are deceived by, then we do get hurt. Then we do feel like, oh my gosh, why is this happening to us? No, this is our reality. We don't occupy a big space here. So we have to be very excellent driven and quality driven.
Very good. You know, in continuing with the nuts and bolts of this, because we have about 7 minutes, and I really also want to address this piece, because 2 years ago at the Gender Summit 1, we had Susie Painter, who was then the executive director of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, and she was a successful fundraiser, executive leadership. And she shared some key lessons that she got from the Lake Institute for Executive Fundraising, right? And how she carried that out, and walked us with the nuts and bolts. And almost all of the participants at Gender Summit 1 said, you know, they don't teach that at seminary. They teach us how to preach and teach the Bible, to exegete the Bible, but to go out there and to write a grant. Who are those places that women leaders, particularly women of color, can go to learn how to write a grant? Number one. Number two, where are those sources of funding? I note here that all three of our panelists are connected to the Presbyterian Church USA, right? Where there's a lot of resources, but outside of denominational structures, what are some of the places that you could point to? So number one, some resources of how to write a grant, how to even write a good proposal. And then number two, where are those funding resources outside the denominational structures or the seminary structures? And so please, anyone who would like to share that, and we have about 5 minutes. And so in any particular order, no particular order, that is.
I think beside the denominational resources, you basically have churches, foundations, individuals, and each one of them takes a different approach. The foundations take a good grant, a really strong grant. And the key there is to make sure that you understand what their requirements are, understand what their process is, understand that you fit inside of their guidelines. And there are a few directories you can use to find these foundations. One of them is candid.org.
C-A-N-D-I-D?
C-A-N-D-I-D.org.
Okay.
Beyond that, any list of people you're going to go find is going to be a list that you build. And it's going to be built through your network. Your network through people constantly telling your story, constantly asking for referrals, constantly asking for introductions, telling your story to people, asking their advice. That's where you are able to really start building a network that leads you to funding. And that's really the heartbeat, the bottom line of fundraising, is building that network.
Okay, very good. Yeah, building the network. Okay.
Yeah.
Maggie and Joanne. Yeah. Maggie.
I would just add just a couple practical educational resources that are out there through the Presbyterian Foundation. We've just launched the Church Financial Leadership Academy. They're like snippet videos that can give you education and enough information to then start to ask some questions. It's free. You can go to churchfla.org, sign in, and start to get some learning that way. The foundation also has grant resources to get you education, not grants for programmatic work, but grants for education around financial literacy. That's a couple just practical things right there. I would say sort of building on what John said, and my own experience when I was in business and I ran a startup for 4 years, ask everybody you know, tell them what you're doing, ask for resources, ask for contacts, ask for connections, tell them what you're doing, say, this is what I think I'm doing, and this is what I think I want to accomplish. And then get feedback from people, have the humility also to say, I have an idea of, I think, how this should work, but what do you think? And do you know someone I can talk to who can help me think through this? I've been a part of a couple of women's networking groups that make space for that, where you can just ask each other and say, does this sound right? Do I sound crazy, or does this sound doable? And then let people start to help you build those connections. I think that, getting on LinkedIn and putting on LinkedIn, I'm doing this thing. Does anyone out there know an expert who I can talk to? And, having those kinds of connections, but just ask for the help, ask for the feedback, ask for, with curiosity, do you think this could work? And then hear what people have to say to you about it.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. Crowdsource it, right? Crowdsource it in so many ways. Social media, LinkedIn, everything. Just put it out there. We will help you. We want to be a community of learners and encouragers. Joanne,
So what
you guys have the last word on this one. Yeah.
What I did was I actually went to training. I also asked, we were only a staff of 2 people at one point, and my assistant went to another training. And then we compared notes. She went to Indianapolis, to the Lake Institute. I went to the Foundation Center in New York City. I did a week-long training there. She did a week-long training. And I've been reading books on fundraising. I read books. And like Maggie and John said, I also look for other people that do this really well. And I learned from them. I think it's really important to find people who do it really well and learn from them. The advantage I have is that we do at Princeton, now realize that this is a full-time job. Princeton has a woman that writes grants. That's her job. But something that you need to remember is that she can edit it and she can put it in the language that would be acceptable, but you are the one that comes up with the idea. Your steering committee, your board, you have to have the idea. You're the one that has to give her the idea, flesh it out. And there are three parts to a grant if you're going to write a grant. It's the proposal part of it, the budget narrative, where you break down the expenses of everything, and then there's an outline of the budget. Most organizations require all three documents. So you need to be proficient in how to expense out any program. Something that I had to learn later was that I wasn't putting all of the expenses that a new program would require. And so when I got grant money, it wasn't really covering everything. And so that's, you need to learn these things and you learn them as you go along. The other thing that I want to share is that there are quite a bit of grants out there that we're not taking advantage of. And I'm going to list them quickly. I'm going to tell you the names of the organizations, and then I'm going to list them quickly. Collegeville Institute provides week-long writers' workshop for pastors, ministers, and lay leaders. You apply to that, and if you get in, they basically pay for your trip, your time there, and your food, and they provide training. There's also, for pastors who are also scholars, resident scholars programs. So if you're a scholar and you're also bivocational, you're in a church, this is a program that you can participate in. They have a ton of resources that you can visit their site and also get resources. The other one that's important is the leadership education at Duke Divinity. They provide thriving ministry grants. They just did $1 million, they sent out $1 million grant for people to submit $1 million grants. They did that right before the pandemic hit, and they extended the timeline, but now that's done. But you need to look at these websites and look for them. They have what they call a reflective leadership grant. It is for leaders that have been in a position for quite some time, and they need time to reflect about the work that they've done, assess it, and then what do they want to do in the future. They have leadership development grants, and that is more for a congregation to do some work together and enhance and advance the leadership. Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning in Theology and Religion. They have grants where they give small grants to pastors and scholars. They have peer mentoring clustering grants, $7,500 for a mentoring group. And they have amazing teaching resources. So there's quite a bit of funding out there. The key, and this is more grant writing, this is not individual, but you need to learn how to do both if you want to build a strong ministry. The key thing is matching, and also being creative about how sometimes you match the funds or who. So if you have a scholar that's attending your church, a faithful member, you may want to sit down and have a conversation and say, can we do a mentoring clustering group? How can we do that together? How do we apply to that? So there's a creative element about fundraising that we're too afraid to even think outside the box. Right. And I want to encourage you to think more creatively and not be so fearful of this space, because you may have great ideas, but you're going to get burned out. You need both money, you need people, and you need to be resourced.
Well, friends, and with that, we hope that you all are encouraged and to know that you are not alone. There's a community that is here to help you, and even beyond this summit, there are so many that want to see you succeed in the vision that God has planted in your heart and in the hearts of your communities. I want to thank Joanne and Maggie and John. Thank you so much for your contributions on this panel and for your ongoing ministries. Thank you. And with that, I want to turn it over to Jane as she'll share some announcements and walk us through to the small group breakout rooms.
Yes, thank you so much, panelists. That was so rich. Audience, hold on. We still have our Q&A session. We have breakout rooms. That information especially that list that Joanne gave us at the end, that is gold. We are going to definitely put that up on our website, on our Facebook and Instagram. Make sure you follow us at Isaac Fellowship. That is so great. Thank you so much. So if you haven't had a chance to type in a question, now's your time to do it. Please write Q&A, type in the question. We also have some people watching us on Facebook Live, and type in your questions there too. We have someone monitoring that, and they'll let our facilitator know. I also have 2 questions for you. If you could tell us what was most helpful for you to hear, and what do you want to hear more of, that would be amazing. So please chat that in to Jane. I'm going to put it right here. What was most hopeful to hear? What do you want to hear more of? If you don't know, we were planning on having this wonderful full 3-day, gathering with food and fellowship. And we had to, because of the coronavirus, we had to minimize it to an hour and a half each day. And so there's more to come from us, but we want to hear from you. What do you want to hear? Just want to remind you that tomorrow's our last day. We are going to talk about how to work with the offices of governing bodies to church plant. So especially if you're working with the denomination, elder boards, other boards, please come, and you'll hear again some really honest, practical tools, tips, advice. Same place, same time. And yes, before we go on to our quick time of Q&A, I want to tell everybody to turn on your videos, because I want to take a photo. So I'm going to screenshot us. I'm going to give you a chance. Turn on your pictures, turn on your videos. And also, just to explain a little bit about breakout rooms, we thought it would be just a gift to the audience to put you in a room with either one of our panelists or one of our collaborative inquiry team members to just debrief for 10 minutes. So don't be shy. You're going to just, I've already have it ready. Okay. So it's like 5 to 6 people in a room. Do not leave. Otherwise it'll be a room of 2 people or something. So don't do that. Okay. It looks like everybody's ready. I'm going to start taking photos. Everybody smile. Smile. Do you hear my camera noise? Okay, wait, I got to go to my next page. You guys look great. Beautiful. Smile. Smile. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Charlene Jin Lee, and she's going to facilitate our Q&A time. Thank you so much.
Thank you to our panelists. What a treat and what an opportunity for all of us to hear from you, and then to direct questions to the breadth and depth of your wisdom and experience. We have a couple of questions before we go on to small group breakout sessions. So I think we were really intrigued, John, with your conversation with the very able and heart-driven donor. And I'm sure that Maggie and Joanne, you have had encounters with similar people. So here's a question. Are there such persons, something like a secret philanthropist club of sort, who are actively looking for worthy causes to fund? If so, how do you identify them?
I can take that. If there is a secret philanthropist club, they've done a good job of keeping it secret. So I don't know how we would find it. But what I will say is, there are markers of people who are ready to be more active philanthropists, and I think that people want to actually get more engaged. But one of the things to look for is exactly that, which is engagement. So if you are in a community, you have people who are involved with you, perhaps they're not giving financially yet, but they're giving of their time. That's a good marker that that's someone who is waiting to be asked to give financially, because maybe they just don't know how yet, or no one has approached them about that. And then just scale that up, right? So if you have someone who has been a faithful giver to either your cause or a similar cause for an extended period of time, that's probably someone who could be approached. And again, be curious about what they might want to give. This is not typical advice to say, don't have a specific amount that you ask for, but I actually say to people, don't have a specific amount that you ask for. When you're talking to someone about who's been a regular giver, talk to them about the opportunities that are available and see what they respond to. But don't also, and I know that this is probably old news for most of you, don't make assumptions about someone, about their capacity or their willingness based on your perception of their ability to give. Oftentimes it is the person who is the more regular giver, the person who is more involved, who has greater capacity to give and greater intention to give than someone who looks like they have a lot, but may not have the same kind of commitment. So, so be curious in that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Wealth and the size of a gift is not correlated at all. It's people who are generous are the ones who will give. And oftentimes the people who have money are not going to give. I agree with Maggie. There's no list. You build that list. And one of the ways to build that list is to look at what your particular project or your particular community, particular foundation is trying to do, and look up and find other similar organizations to yours and find out who are funding them. Because you know, they don't give all their money to one thing. People spread it around. I would start by, you know, who funds Isaac? Who are the supporters of this particular conference? They all obviously have a desire to see women advanced in ministry. Maybe some of them should be on your list that you're building and you're starting to work through. So look at the similar organizations and who is funding them, and draw on those people.
Yeah, and just something that if I can add quickly to what John said, this is very tactical, but it actually works. Back in the days when we could like go places and there were programs and performances and things like that, there's always the program books, and you can look in the back and see who are the different levels of funders to, you know, to the symphony, or you know, I'm thinking of the Oakland Zoo because I live in Oakland and my husband and I are big supporters of the zoo. And you can go on websites and you can start to look. The individual names may be less interesting to you, though those could be interesting as well. But also there's usually a lot of family foundations that are listed, or smaller foundations that are regionally based. And even though folks are giving to secular organizations, that doesn't mean they're not engaged in their faith community or in supporting faith communities. So that's another place you can go to look for some of those, you know, under the radar organizations, but that might be really interested in what you're doing, especially in a local geography.
Very good. A question was asked about GoFundMe or pages like that, a more socially networked personal fundraising platforms. Any thoughts or insights about that?
I'll jump in quickly on that, just because I have a lawyer brain, because I did practice law for a long time. And I would say, if you're going to use something like GoFundMe or Facebook fundraising or something like that, be clear on what your legal status is and what you're fundraising for. So if you have nonprofit status, if you have corporate status, how you're going to receive funds. Because what you don't want to do is be receiving funds that someone thought were philanthropic funds, but you're an individual. That can be some sort of nasty tax consequences there. So talk to someone about that before you start a GoFundMe, because also, you know, if you're an individual and you receive funds from other individuals, there are going to be some tax consequences with that as well.
Thank you, Maggie. Joanne or John, any thoughts on that question?
No, I don't have any experience with that.
Neither do I.
Yeah. Okay. Just a quick follow-up, but actually on the question earlier, you talked about identifying those people who have a track record of giving to certain causes or certain initiatives. And how do you approach that first cold call? Is it an email? Is it a call? Do you find people that are reachable within that person's organization? Can you briefly speak on what works, and does an email work?
So,
Go ahead, Joanne.
so there was one time where we saw an ad for a grant, a very large grant from an organization, and we really didn't have a history with them. And I just decided to write a letter to the organization. And to my surprise, I got a response immediately. The person knew of HTI, quoted all kinds of accomplishments that we had had, and then invited me to speak to the officer that ran these grants, and I scheduled a meeting, walked in, had a conversation, and before I knew it, I was applying for a $400,000 grant that we got. So that was one of my cold calls. That doesn't always happen, but
There foundations, not Christian foundations, but foundations have to file something called a 990 form. And the 990 form will include board members on it. And so that's a way to be able to get a look at board members. And I would take the names of board members and I would take those and show those to my board or my network and say, do you know these people? Anybody on here? If you do, can you introduce me to that person? There's no reason not to send an email or make a phone call. A lot of times foundations will want you to send a 1 or 2 paragraph description of your project, and they will look at that and they will tell you if they are interested in that project. So you can clear it out that way.
So something that that John said, I think early on, which is, ask people questions about themselves because they like to talk about what they're doing. I would say, treat this as an informational interview. You can always reach out to someone and say, I'd love to have coffee with you. I'd love to have tea with you and hear about what you do and why you give. So I was working with a nonprofit foundation in my area a number of years ago, and there is a very large donor or a very, very large prospect that that folks really wanted to get a hold of and to talk to. And I happened to be at an event for something else that this individual was at as well. And I actually just walked up to them and I said, would you be willing to have coffee with me and tell me about what you give to and why you give? I didn't say anything about the organization I was with. I didn't say, because I'm interested in this. I just said, I want to hear about what matters to you. And he was willing to sit down with me. So I think that sometimes, just having that willingness to put yourself out there, but just to say, I want to hear about you. Would you talk to me about what you do is a good entry point as well.
Thank you. I wish we could go on and on. We would like to then give all of the participants an opportunity to kind of voice out what you've been thinking, your reflections and additional questions. Each of our panelists will be assigned to a small group. So you may luck out and be able to ask direct questions of a panelist in your group. So I will let Jane take over.
Yes, so we just want to thank Facebook Live for joining us, and we're going to ask you to join us tomorrow. If you want to join through Zoom so you could join our breakout rooms, then please register online. Thank you so much. And I will be sending